So by 1971 or 72, I had tried federal cases in Kansas, Oklahoma, Colorado, California, Illinois, Wisconsin, Texas, actually 2 jurisdictions in Texas. And was just starting them. I also had cases going in state courts in Wyoming, in New Mexico, Utah, Nebraska. Actually, I had a federal case in Nebraska too. Illinois, Michigan, Missouri, Kansas, and I think that about covers it, if I mentioned Arizona and New Mexico or not. In any event, I also forgot I had one of my first cases was in both federal and state courts in Mississippi. I also had another one going on in federal court in Louisiana. So I was doing a lot of traveling. I was doing a lot of cases. And I was having fun. And I also, at that point, pretty much had many of the drug cases out of the western area come through my office in one form or another. And I was in a pretty good position to essentially evaluate and figure out what was going on. I spent a lot of time sociogramming my cases and connections, things such as that. However, the Mrs. Tannenbaum situation kept getting more and more bizarre. For instance, she signed off on an immigrant from Czechoslovakia whose uncle was head of the Czech KGB there, called the STB, who was an interpreter at the Interpol Hotel in Prague. There was a lot of other intrigue going on. There was intrigue going on with SDS. There's intrigue going on with various political movements. I got re-involved in politics in 1968 at the Lawyers Guild Convention that was held in Boulder, and met a lot of really high-profile lawyers, and I used to have drinks and dinner with them, such as Bill Kunstler, who did the Chicago 7 trial, Lenny Weinglass, who became a friend of mine, a couple lawyers out of San Francisco, one of which was Steve Bingham, whose father or grandfather, I forget which, was Hiram Bingham. In the meantime, my brother's career was getting bizarre. He was essentially assigned to an anti-terrorist squad doing clandestine operations as a helicopter pilot flying HH-53s. At first he started picking up canisters for what was later to become the National Reconnaissance Organization. And then he was stationed out of Hickam Field in Hawaii. During Vietnam, he started out as a B-52 aircraft commander and ended up with a helicopter squadron on air search and rescue. He managed in that process to win 2 distinguished flying crosses prior to him being moved to Hawaii. On a rescue mission picking up a satellite one of his HH-53s sank, and he was called in front of a board to explain it. It turned out okay, but in the meantime, the court-martial people were questioned by some family friends, and it kind of got put to a stop. In the meantime, Tannenbaum's bouncing off the walls, the press are bouncing off the walls. All this coverage is going on. I'm getting called for conversations and getting called for comments and everything else. In the course of this, it turned out the president of the University of Colorado was a CIA asset. The CIA had been infiltrating the student government of University of Colorado, and there was all kinds of spooks and spies floating around University of Colorado because the Bureau of Standards was the headquarters for the whole Manhattan Project as far as personnel was concerned. Many of the physicists from the Manhattan Project ended up at University of Colorado. Project Blue Book, which was to have checked into UFO phenomenon, was run by a physicist out of Boulder named Condon, and pilots for Vietnam were being trained here. Many of the people going to Bay of Pigs were trained here. A whole Tibetan army was trained at Camp Hale, and all this other stuff was going on here. General Singlaub and Robert Brown were with the Phoenix Project, which was allegedly the assassination group in Vietnam, and there was a lot of that influence around it. So I wasn't really too surprised when these feds came and said, "Shut up, you face, or we're going to have something drastic happen to you." Well, I scared the hell out of a lot of people when I ran for DA, claiming I would look into it. And there was a lot of retaliation, and that's kind of what I'm going over on my videos. The day after I lost the nomination, the county clerk called and said the Internal Revenue Service was over there going through any filings and records regarding me. The court clerk called with the same information. And then a little later, this little guy named Lyle Stice and his partner came in and informed me that I was under audit from the IRS. They audited me for 87 consecutive weeks. They talked to every one of my clients and asked about me and made a point of telling them that I was under investigation, which is not good for a criminal defense lawyer. In any event, I had a law firm of 6 lawyers, and by the time they were done with me, I had to leave town. I moved in with a former U.S. attorney and lieutenant governor for political protection, and had very few clients left. Plus, I had to commute to Denver every day. I rode through that, and at the end, when the dam broke, it occurred because I read an article in the New York Times about this lawyer in Yuma, Arizona, who had been audited as a retaliatory measure by the Internal Revenue Service because he was fairly successful in drug cases. Now, as I said earlier, I'd had drug cases all over the damn country, pretty much, and was in a position to put 2 and 2 together, and I was already seeing good evidence tying the intelligence community into drug trafficking, but not really being able to pinpoint it, nor did I particularly care at that time. However, it must have made a few people nervous, because they came after me with a vengeance. Well, after that article, Charlie Vigil, a former U.S. attorney that was represented me, got a confession out of the IRS guy, and he said we were right. There was a third party requested the Internal Revenue Service to sort of lean on me, audit me, and maybe even put me out of business. Now, at that time, I thought it was the old Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs, which had by then morphed into the DEA. And I fully inspected that because some of the other antics that I'd been observing by the drug people. However, when I asked them, the agent, Laos Dice was his name, told me it wasn't the drug people, the DEA. Instead, it was the Central Intelligence Agency. Now, being young and naive and not particularly connected to government, my reaction was, who the hell is that? So I've sort of spent the last 50 years trying to figure that out. Now, what I've done on my blog, Dennis Comments, is I've posted the New York Times article about the lawyer in Yuma and his experience with the IRS. I also published the testimony about the IRS political conduct, in which they targeted various individuals in order to put them out of business, and I put that transcript on my blog too. I also put a link on my Facebook page to both of those. And I think probably it would be incumbent upon all of you to take a look at that and read the background, which will pretty much explain where I'm going from here in my comments in both my blog and in this video rendition of my history. Now, I realize this is rough, it's unedited. The reason for that is my age, my health, etc. I've got a lot of information here. I've got a whole basement full of files, 50 years of case files involving government contacts, government constructs, government misconducts, linking the intelligence community with drug trafficking, with international affairs. I've liaisoned with people such as Sally Denton, an author, Doug Valentine, what the hell is his name? Took over Walter Winchell's postings. Jack Anderson, his daughter was going to see you at the time, met with him quite a bit. I'd also met with David Wise, who wrote a few books. He was a writer for the Washington Post. I had a lot of press contacts, and we discussed a lot of things over the phone, and so I got a lot of information that way. Another time, in a corporation of which I was chairman of the board, I put on a seminar with a 3-star general of Defense Intelligence Agency called Bert Stubblebine. He and I had a lot of discussions about various things. His project was the Psychic Warrior Project, or remote viewing, and he confirmed a lot of my suspicions too. So a lot of what I'm putting forth there is the culmination of 50 years of research and things like this, and life experience. You can believe it or not, I don't really give a shit, but this is my story. I also am not going to edit any of this because that takes a lot of stuff, and I don't want to interfere with the raw performance. What I would prefer is maybe a few of you people would get together and maybe edit some of this and make it coherent and a cohesive story that we could present at some time in the future. And I'm up for a project if anybody wants to suggest that. So we're going to start a series with essentially my trip through the looking glass over the years. And because it's so bizarre and off the wall and everything else, I would really appreciate comments regarding my story. I'd appreciate criticisms. I'd appreciate praise. Anybody who wants to call me a nutcase, feel free to do so. It won't be the first time. But from my point of view and perspective about everything that I'm setting forth here, true with my construction of reality and in my experience. So enjoy, and please give me feedback. Thank you very much.